Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Alastair Stewart and Tibor Lasco. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. So today we're going to be talking about service providers and the PCI DSS. So my first question for you guys is, what is the simplest way to determine whether an organisation is a service provider or a merchant if the payment flow is indirect?
Follow the money. Tibor, it's follow the money as usual.
Yeah, follow the money. But I think an even simpler question is, have you been assigned a merchant ID by your acquirer? If you have a merchant ID, the name is in the, it's on the 10, you are a merchant. If you do not have a merchant ID, that means whatever service you provide is in service of a merchant, i.e. you're a service provider. But it trips up a lot of people because, especially for me, again, in the last few weeks, was I don't see cardholder data. I don't touch it.
Kind of question.
I cannot be a service provider because I don't service cardholder data. But again, do you have a merchant ID? And
do your customers have merchant IDs? Are you doing something in relation to those? So if they can't find merchant IDs, I go, well, look at where the money goes. So when a card transaction happens, money leaves a customer's account and it hits a business account. That account is the merchant account. Anybody else involved in assisting or protecting that transaction is therefore by default service provider. So it's follow the money first and then go, what are we doing that relates to that particular transaction? What our service do?
And sometimes even a service provider can take this a step further and say like, oh, we are being paid for services. But then again, the question goes back is, what services are you being paid for and by whom? So the fact that you get money, obviously, good for you. You're in business and it's profitable, hopefully. But the fact that you get paid for services doesn't make you a merchant.
Yeah, and being a service provider doesn't preclude you being a merchant as well, and vice versa. You can be both as a business. So you can be a service provider for the services you provide to your clients and a merchant for the payments you take for your services if you take payments via credit or debit cards for those services. So you can be both a merchant and a service provider. In some bigger organizations, you can be a service provider to yourself. If you've got a different department or different section that's providing services to a different part of the business, you can be a service provider to yourself as a merchant. So that's it. One doesn't preclude being the other. You can be both.
Yes. And I think we both assessed companies who actually were both. So we were technically written two rocks. We or SecD or whatever it was for a service provider, one for the merchant activities and one for the service provider activities.
Usually there'll be a lot of overlap between them, but nevertheless, there are two separate assessments, technically speaking.
Yeah, and the age-old argument that no PAN doesn't change your role. It changes your scope, but it doesn't change your role. The fact that you are a service provider.
I'd estimate probably 60-70% of the merchants I do don't touch a PAN.
Yes.
Yet they're still merchants. So the PAN is not the be-all and end-all of PCI DSS.
Yeah.
What fundamentally differentiates PCI DSS expectations for service providers compared with merchants?
I think the key here is risk. Service providers have a lot more burden on what they have to do because they're a greater risk. One service provider breach can lead to a breach of multiple merchants, and so you present a much higher risk, so they put a much higher burden of compliance on you. That's why you get one SAQ and no questions about it. You do that one and that's it. You don't get choices to leave bits out effectively.
Yeah. Merchants are responsible for their own environment and they need to secure it. And I think the reason self-assessment questionnaires came about is for the council to realizing that they should not, for example, if somebody has a e-commerce redirect web server, they should not be subjected to go through an entire assessment where 90% of the requirements are technically not relevant to their payment setup. And as you said, a service provider, if he and especially if you're talking about a large one, it can compromise millions of merchants, which is why the validation requirements, there are additional requirements within the standard that are only relevant for service providers as well, just to make sure that the risk is appropriately managed. I think.
Yeah, it's borne out in the breaches as well. I think a large percentage, I don't know the exact numbers, but certainly a significant percentage of the largest card data breaches across the past decade have been through service providers. They have attacked a service provider and used that to attack multiple merchants, some of whom are big and some of whom are small. And so, unfortunately, you're in a position that, as a service provider, presenting a greater risk. On the flip side, you can upsell your services. So if you're a compliant service provider, you can charge more than a non-compliant one. So there is a way to recuperate the cost involved in compliance, which merchants don't get. But yeah, you are greater risk, so they will put greater controls on you.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, I think it's, I'm very cautious about the word. I don't want to use Ponzi scheme, but I kind of mean it because
it's kind of pyramid in shape. I get what you mean in terms of one part can cause other bits to collapse above them. When you take one out, the top layers can collapse down from it, if you see what I mean. Yeah.
Yes.
Almost reverse pyramid, isn't it, really?
Yes. For an e-commerce merchant, one of your SEC eligibility criteria is that all of the transaction processing is outsourced to a PCI compliant service provider. So it's sort of like one generates business for the other.
Yeah. There's an element of that. So
yeah,
but yeah, it's definitely not what you said it was. Let's not use that word too much.
Right.
If our product never sees PAN, what exactly are we providing that makes us a service provider?
Security services.
Security
services, basically. Yep. And if you ask what a security service is, well, how long's a piece of string? Typical ones: logging and monitoring, SOC and NOC services. You won't see card data if you're doing monitoring of logs, but you're definitely providing security services. Infrastructure management, hosting and managing firewall infrastructure, that kind of stuff.
Web application platforms, content delivery, DNS, WAF, deployment pipelines. Again, as you said, how long is a piece of string? And again, this is where I think somehow the people got the message of store, process, or transmit cardholder data, and sort of the knowledge ended there. And they don't really remember what comes after is like if there's any security services or anything that could impact the security of the cardholder data that's still in scope. And as you said, for example, I don't know, a company provide online hardware security modules for managing encryption cards or keys. They are in scope, even though they have nothing to do with cardholder data.
Yeah. I think largely if you're questioning yourself as a service provider, if your customers are telling you they need to be compliant, then you pretty much should go with it because they're the ones who've assessed the services that you're providing. They must be using those services on something that is in scope of PCI DSS, therefore they've determined you're in scope. So you should really be led by your clients and saying, look, this is being used in this environment, so we need it to be compliant.
And I think we see more and more, even recently, which is, I don't know, I always find this very strange that PCI is around for like nearly 20 years. I think the first version came out 2006, 1.0. So it's about, and there are still service providers who are questioning whether they should or should not be PCI compliant. And I think it's such a competitive edge, especially in today's world, that even the question coming up is, why haven't you done, and I don't know, even like data center hosting providers, your scope is minimal. Why haven't you done it like 15 years ago?
Just do it and then add it onto your services, something you do. Yeah, I have service providers who I do their assessments annually, and yet some years they don't actually have any card transactions or customers using their environment for card services, but they know it could be. So they get it as a badge to upsell their service and say, look, we want to be compliant because we want to sell a compliant service, even though we're currently not using it in that way. So yeah, the question is, if you're a service provider, why haven't you done it? You really should.
Yeah. And if you look into cost and benefit analysis, again, I'm not a finance person, but I think when you can slap on to your service offering that you are actually externally validated or you are PCI compliant, that would probably add to your bottom line as well.
Yeah, it definitely does.
So if we only host the merchant's website or application, but payments go to a PSP, why are we not out of scope?
Because you still have the ability to impact the security of cardholder data. And it sounds like a mantra that I think 99% of the QSs keep telling to their clients. And, when you woke up in the middle of the night at 2:00, this is the first thing comes to your mind. Store, process, transmit, or impact the security of the cardholder data.
Yeah. So the key that I explain is to merchants as well as service providers is that website has a link to a payment processor. If somebody compromises the website, they can change that link to point to something that looks like the payment processor but isn't. And that type of attack has happened a lot previously. So the key here is that link has the ability to affect the security of the payment process environment. So that link on that website or web application is in scope and as a result needs to be protected. And if you're involved in hosting that or managing that in some way, you're going to end up being a service provider for those services.
Yeah, a lot of people, or at least merchants I talk to or web hosting providers are say like, well, but the payment service provider, Stripe, whoever has all the card information. But again, as you said, the question is whether the right information reaches that payment provider. And if your web server gets compromised, your card information or your client's information may actually end up in whoever's hand, whoever compromised that web server.
Yeah, that type of attack has happened quite a lot, which is why those websites and redirects came into scope in the first place.
What evidence should we expect to provide to prove that we truly do not store, process, or transmit PAN, and that we're not accidentally doing it through logs, telemetry, or integrations?
This is interesting.
There's a lot you can do. I mean, you can provide examples of the logs and telemetry in the first place, so we can look at what information can be in a log, so we can see that it can't contain card data. You could do discovery scans.
As a QSA, actually, from one QSA to another, are you satisfied if they provide you with a network diagram with the transaction flow? Does that satisfy you, or would you go deeper?
So generally speaking, with most clients, validating a process flow to show that the process in no way captures card data, so like a redirect mechanism and everything else, there's no way for that process flow to take in card data, so it couldn't possibly get in via that method anyway. So you could say, well, with certainty that, because the form on the website doesn't send the card data to the website, etc., the place you then look is logs, and you look at a log and go, well, there's no entry in the log where it captures that information within the standard format of a log that it captures. And so there's no way for card data to get into the environment. There's no way it can be stored in the log, so there's no need to go any further than that. However, if the process flow is more complex, or there is a way that card data comes into their environment, so they are transmitting it or processing it in some way, then you probably need to look deeper into application logs, into memory storage, into what it's doing with that data and where it's sending it and where it's encrypted and where it's not. But for the vast majority, I don't tend to dig deeper than validating the process flow cannot bring card data in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. I guess depending on the environment really is whether are there any, if the software malfunctions, is there any like debugging log that could potentially cover cardholder data? But again, it's
error logs can be a favorite place where it accidentally gets captured.
Yeah.
But you get to look at those as part of assessment anyway, because you're supposed to review logs and review application logs and those kind of stuff to make sure there isn't any sensitive information in them. It's not often I insist clients do discovery scans, partly because they're quite onerous. They're not exactly simple, easy things to do. They're heavy on network traffic and they throw up a lot of false positives and take a lot of time to do. So for the vast majority of clients, they become not required based on the level of effort, unless they've had the old DESV thrown at them because they've had a breach, in which case, you probably need to go a lot deeper.
Yeah, but I guess that dictates, when you assess 10 incident response, did they have an incident? Could that resulted in a debugging log or capturing cardholder data but one connects to the other.
Yes.
So if an organization has admin access to systems that influence checkout or payment routing, does that alone make them a service provider in PCI terms?
Simple answer, payment routing, yes. Checkout, maybe not. Depends exactly what part of the checkout process you're involved in, but certainly the payment routing, yeah, if you've got admin access to anything involved with that, yes, definitely. You're going to end up.
Yeah, I guess it depends how far that admin access goes. Like console access, privileged SSH, any deployment rights, DNS, path, whatever it could impact.
I should have defaulted to the standard QSA answer of it depends rather than just going with yes. That's what I should have done there. Yeah, made a mistake, sorry.
Yes, as always, it depends.
So this is quite an interesting one. What is the most common incorrect argument you see when service providers say they qualify for a merchant SAQ?
Yeah, they look at the criteria for the eligibility criteria and go, well, when it says you don't store, process, or transmit electronically, it says you route it through third parties. They go through that criteria list and go, well, yeah, of course we meet all that, without reading the paragraph at the top that says the merchant attests that for this payment channel, you meet these criteria, i.e. the merchant, and you're not the merchant. So they look at the list of criteria without looking at the paragraph at the top that explains what the criteria are relating to. Aside from the fact, the SAQD for service providers is the only one that's titled for service providers should give it away. But again, they just don't read it. They go straight into the criteria and go, well, I meet those criteria, so it must be me.
But to be fair, as much as they are wrong in this approach, I sort of understand they're looking for an easy way out. But then even when you tell them that you go back to like Adam and Eve, there are merchants and there are service providers, and you are not a merchant because you don't have a merchant ID. But then at the same time, you explain to these people that, okay, so yes, the entire standard applies to you, even as a SecD, if your transaction volumes are under 300,000 or a full assessment, but a lot of requirements will be not applicable.
Yeah.
So yes, it will be more than those, I don't know, whatever is it, 16 or 18 requirements, I think, in a SAC-A. A lot more will be applicable, and you probably need to do some extra work, but it's still not, it's not burning your house down with the assessment.
You're not doing the full 300 odd requirements. You'll be doing more than an SAQA, but you won't be doing masses of them, because if you're doing it, if you're operating an environment that looks like an SAQA environment, a lot of the requirements will automatically just not be applicable to you because of that, especially if you as a service provider these days are also outsourcing. So if you're a managed hosting provider, but you're outsourcing the actual hosting to AWS, then you're offloading some of the requirements to them as well. So service providers can have their own service providers and do the same trick as to get rid of some of the responsibilities to somebody else. So.
Yes, and especially if you use their native tools for log management, for firewalls, for WAF, for whatever it is.
Their secure builds as well, all that kind of stuff. That's already all compliant. So
it's going to be more expensive, but it makes your compliance efforts a lot smoother.
What are the most common gaps you see in responsibility matrices and shared responsibility models between service providers and their clients?
I think it's the gaps I see is where people assume that requirement is either the responsibility of the merchant or the provider without realizing it can be both.
Confusion.
Yes. They go, well, the merchant does that. And you go, yeah, they do it for that system, but the service provider does it for this part of the environment. So it's understanding that you can split the responsibility across the environment to make it a shared responsibility.
Well, a responsibility matrix should be either the client's the service provider or shared. My general advice to my clients always is, if it's your responsibility, you don't really have to say anything. If you deem that it's your client's responsibility, explain why you believe it's your client's responsibility. And if it's shared, especially then be able to draw a line, because this is how much I do, but anything on top of it is your responsibility. This is what I see most often from responsibility matrices, and especially, I'm not calling out I wouldn't dare calling out any of the, large cloud providers, but when one responsibility matrix is used for 225 product, it's difficult sometimes to understand. Yes. And I'm not saying that they should do one for each product, but sometimes, and I'm not blaming any clients, because especially if you don't have decades of experience with PCI, it's difficult to sort of like sift through okay, so who is responsible for this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's difficult to on the larger matrices to look at it and go, it's a shared responsibility, but which bits of the scope are whose responsibility for this requirement? Yeah. Where do we apply this requirement to these services? And within those services, where do we apply it to the service provider's bit or the merchant's bit? And it can get very, very blurry, and then things fall through the cracks.
Yeah. Which is why you need a QSA.
Yeah, you need us, and we'll try and dig through that blurriness for you.
Yes.
How should a merchant respond when their supplier insists on providing a merchant-style attestation instead of a service provider attestation?
Move providers.
Well, okay, I would say push back first before you ditch them.
Yeah.
So maybe open a conversation and explain to them that, hello, you're not a merchant, you're providing a service for me. And if they still refuse to get your point, then yes, resort to Alastair's first instinct.
Actually, I'd say after that, you call in a QSA, because sometimes having a third-party consultant come in and tell them why they are a service provider can lend weight to it. They don't have to listen to you because you've been their customer for years. They just want to carry on with the service, and they don't want to upset things. So sometimes having a third party just come in and say, no, look, this is the way it is, can help. But yeah, if all else fails, you just got to move providers to somebody who is willing to do it properly.
Yeah, and there are plenty out there.
Oh, yeah.
So even, whatever sort of online business or just physical hosting, or even some sort of managed hosting you're looking for, there are many, many, many providers who are taking this seriously, and they understand their PCI responsibility. So there's no shortage of compliant service providers.
So just sort of following on from that, what are the practical consequences if a service provider validates incorrectly as a merchant, both for the service provider and for the merchant relying on them?
It depends. Were we the QSA? Is it our responsibility?
No, it can't be. The contracts. The contracts we've signed, Tibor, we're all clear. It's fine.
Right.
No, well, it's non-compliance, isn't it? Is your end-up consequence? Is the service provider is obviously not compliant because it's validated incorrectly, and the merchant is non-compliant because their service provider is non-compliant. So ultimately, it's whatever that results in, which is typically could be fines, could be extra increased controls. Who knows what it could be? But it a lot of pain and money usually.
Yes, if the worst comes to pass and you as a merchant get compromised, then on top of fines, you need to validate as a level 1 merchant. There are all sorts of repercussions that you need to face. And even without being compromised, you can have your acquirer can impose additional transaction charges on you. Because they consider you as a higher risk merchant. So they just want to recoup some money beforehand. But again, let's just get this clear. If you get compromised, the card brands are not fining you. They're going to fine your acquirer. And in your acquirer agreement, in a very small print at the bottom of it, says they're going to post everything down to you.
That's for the merchant, right? So the acquirer will find the merchant. If the breach is a result of the service provider, the acquirer won't be interested in that excuse. They will still fine the merchant. So the merchant will bear the brunt of those fines. Whether the merchant can then pass those fines on to the service provider will depend upon your contractual agreements with those providers. So you need to get your legal teams involved to be able to pass on the consequences of breach if it is the fault of your service providers. And as service providers, you need to make sure contracts are set up in such that they can't pass blame onto you if it's not your fault, because the acquirer is only interested in finding the merchant. They hold the merchant solely responsible for them and their service providers.
Yeah, because they don't have a contractual relationship with the service provider, technically. So the only legal way for them is to, find the merchant.
Yeah. So as a merchant and as service providers, you should have your legal teams involved in drawing up the business contracts to make sure that responsibilities and consequences can be adequately divided up where they lie should the worst case happen.
Yeah. But again, let's just put a shameless plug in here. Just hire us, and this is not going to happen.
Might want to put some allegedly and caveats around that. I'm sure our legal team will have something to say about that statement, but yeah.
Yeah, well, your chance of this is happening is significantly reduced.
That's better. Yeah.
There you go.
Are there any questions you can ask a vendor to quickly expose whether they're a service provider, even if they claim they're not?
Yes. Are you assigned a merchant ID? Yes or no? I don't know.
That just determines whether they're a merchant or not. If you're a merchant going after a service provider and you claim they're need to be compliant, what questions can you ask to expose them and say they clearly are?
Oh, I see what you mean. I misunderstood that.
I mean, my first port of call would be, rather than asking questions, just tell them how the service is going to be deployed in your environment. Tell them what that service is going to be affecting, because they may not have conceived that their service can be used on a PCI environment. They may not have understood. They may just go, well, we just built this service that does this. This is all it does. And you go, yeah, but when we use it, it's used in this environment in this way, so it can affect the security of our customers' cardholder data. So rather than asking questions, explain to them how the service is being used. Yep. And hopefully they should then be able to see that it's being used in a PCI environment or in a PCI compliant way.
The challenges are when, or at least in my experience, when you do like some sort of managed service, whether it's WAF, I don't know, whatever, and they're not even considering whether the web application firewall that they provide to an e-commerce merchant, for example, is processing payments. So they don't have that understanding that just by providing a security service pulls them into the scope of PCI.
How should service providers approach requirement 12 in terms of policies, governance, and executive accountability, rather than treating it purely as an administrative exercise?
I think it's changed quite a bit in version 4, didn't it? Because even completing a ROC section for requirement 12 was the easiest of them all, because you just had to copy and paste your name. You didn't have to put any sort of explanation or what you actually done. But I think it puts a lot more attention to who's responsible for the program, who manages the program. It does talk about risk assessment in a much detailed, like a more detailed way than the previous versions of PCI was. So I think requirement 12 sort of, instead of being a documents only sort of requirement, it was, if I can compared to ISO, it's sort of like an ISMS type thing. So you have to have a management system in place.
It's much more of governance requirements rather than just documentation requirements now. The governance has to actually have effects and be used by people. So yeah, there's a lot more of what are you doing with these documents, right? Are you just writing a policy and just putting it in a folder and forgetting about it? Or no, let's actually look at how you deploy that policy. Let's look at the training that you do. Let's look at the processes you follow on the back of these policies. So yeah, it's much more of a governance requirement these days.
Yeah, and then I tried to remember version 3.2.1 was so long ago. Jesus, 4 years now, I think.
Yeah.
Was it, correct me if I'm wrong, was it even a requirement there that the overall responsibility of the program, the PCI program, had to be assigned to somebody?
There was the one about having a chief information security officer.
Right.
But there was nothing about having the executive management involved. So the requirements around PCI charter and all the rest of it, that came in. Actually, I think that came in 3.2, wasn't in 3. Somewhere between those smaller versions, the requirement for the charter and the executive management communication program, and that came in along with the quarterly internal review requirement as well. To for people to actually check that things are being done and feed that back to management and get executive management involved in it. Traditionally, we used to have problems convincing executives they need to take interest in the PCI compliance of their business.
What role does automation realistically play in helping service providers meet and sustain PCI DSS requirements?
It's always an AI question, isn't there? These days. I see a lot of automation in service providers where there's a lot of busy work to do. So like the SOC and NOC services, logging and monitoring and virus scanning and that kind of stuff and traffic monitoring, that's where automation comes in, and it can help. I guess it can help them pass more data through the systems to get a bigger picture of what's going on from security monitoring purposes. That's where I see automation helping our providers handle more data and provide tighter services, I guess.
And I think on the other hand is when there's an extremely small team, which they're just so scattered to practically run an environment day to day that they just keep forgetting their quarterly scans. They keep forgetting. So all these periodic requirements that they need to do for compliance. And again, automation has the ability to alert you when you need to do something, and then it's not coming out of your assessment 12 months later that you haven't done any of your scans and stuff. But there are a lot of compliance tools, I think, these days that are built for this and available.
Yeah, I mean, it can cause problems, obviously, with automation. It can cause things to be overlooked, and you can put automation on tasks that, quite frankly, shouldn't be automated and should have a human oversight, and then get things missed. So you have to be careful where you use it and make sure there is some kind of human oversight and checking on it. But it certainly does allow service providers to do more than they used to.
Yeah, I agree. Just the fact that an automated scan will do your ASV scan for you, or internal scan, as long as the human doesn't look at it and see it's filled with high-risk vulnerabilities and it's, nobody's touching it. And it's all because, we're automated this and everything's fine. It defeats the purpose.
So in the event of a security incident, what actions by a service provider most strongly influence a QSA's assessment of readiness and maturity?
It's an interesting one. There's a lot of grey area when it comes to investigating security incidents, because when you've got split stuff between service providers and merchants, the merchant wants to see the logs or do the investigations, and the service provider doesn't want to allow them access to the systems because there's securities to consider, there's sensitive data, there's other clients' data to consider. So there's a lot of discussion when it comes to investigating security incidents and the responsibility surrounding what should or should not a service provider allow their merchant access to. There are some requirements around drawing those lines in the standard, but it's still an area where you end up with, we want to see this because there's been a breach. No, you can't because it's proprietary, and there's a lot of that goes on. So it can be difficult to investigate breaches where there's a split of responsibilities if the parties haven't sorted out beforehand how that's going to be done as part of their response plan.
Yeah, just piggyback to it. To me, is speed and maturity. If something happens, do you know what you need to do, or are you going to run around like headless chicken? Are you able to, notify the people who are involved with incident response responsibilities? Are they able to answer or respond in a meaningful manner?
You need to know exactly what you're going to do before it all happens. You need to know who to speak to, who to ask, and you need to be sure they're going to be able to give you the data and not just argue and say, no, we can't do it. So there needs to be the agreements in advance between you that this data needs to be available as soon as possible. Speed is key when it comes to responding to incidents.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but for me, I had a few clients in my time who were actually breached, or they had some sort of like significant security incident. And weirdly enough, well, actually not weirdly enough, but naturally, incident response testing, annual testing was always spot on from that point onward, because they learned their lesson. They knew that it was weak, and then they realized how important it is. And I think incident response, was it 1210, I believe?
Yep.
It's one of the most underrated requirements, I think, in the entire standard, because people just, we did a tabletop exercise and we discussed what happens if our office Wi-Fi router goes down. What are we going to do? Or finding some very trivial exercise. But then when, the proverbial thing hits the fan, they just don't know how to respond.
The fact that the 1210 requirement has a 7, 8, maybe even 9 sub-requirements tells you they want a lot of detail in the plan. So the requirement itself is incredibly detailed about what should be in it. And so when you test and check your plan out, you should be checking all of it and making sure that it's going to not break when you come to lean on it, as it were.
Yeah. Although, not to, drag on the council, but for example, a SEC A, I think the only requirement is 1210. Boom. Do you have it or you don't? You don't have to test it. You don't have to do anything with it. Nope. Do you have it or not?
Yeah.
And if you provide a one-pager that says incident response plan, technically...
Yeah, as long as you meet the 5 or 6 bullet points they put in that requirement, you don't need to do anything beyond that. So, it is a little light touch for that, which, perhaps they should... Maybe they will. Version 5, maybe they'll beef that up a bit. Who knows? I'm sure version 5 is on the horizon.
You keep saying that, and I keep on believing you, but...
No, I know, it doesn't seem until like yesterday it was version 4, but no, there have been murmurings inside the industry. Perhaps we'll see at the community meeting later this year.
So thank you so much for another really insightful discussion today, guys. If any of our listeners would like to ask Alastair and Tibor a question that they could answer in a future episode, you can either pop your question in the comments, or there's going to be a link in the description that will take you to a form which you can fill out with your question. So thank you again for your time today, guys, and thank you everyone for listening today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.